Hello guys, David Vose here. Well, I'm finally doing a video earlier. I got up this morning and I've been sitting here for about an hour just going over this absolute amazing vision that I had. You probably hear the wind in the background. It's been windy, and I guess that means that winter's coming or fall or something. I either have the choice of sitting out here and you can hear the wind, or going in the truck and sitting, but it's kind of hot in there and stuffy. And I don't like the quality of my voice when I'm in that truck. So I'm here under the canopy. I haven't gotten into the dome yet, but we're going to be moving into there soon. Just in time, because it looks like winter's coming. But friends, I'm completely overwhelmed by a vision that I had. The only other time that I've had several visions that were just revelatory beyond anything we can really talk about or discuss today. I have talked a little bit about a couple of them, but some of them have been more personal and that kind of thing. But this is really profound, what the Lord has shown me. I know for a lot of you, you might think, well, Dave, you just had a dream, come on, get over it. We all have dreams. Yeah, we do. We all have dreams. And I am telling you that your dreams is how the Lord will communicate with you. Your mind is a flowing river. You wonder where these thoughts come from. Where does life and the occurrences come from? Why do the trees grow? Why do the flowers bloom? The beauty of this world is its patterns. It isn't random. Because what would random be? Just chaos. There wouldn't be, you don't get the sense of pleasure or happiness from chaos. You get I might have to go into the truck. It's getting pretty windy. You get the sense of confusion with chaos. Chaos is unexpected. Chaos is haphazard. Nothing is in order. And remember, the universe is actually called in the Bible and ancient texts, it's called the cosmos, and that means order. In fact, cosmetics today, which is what women put on their face, comes from the word to order or arrange. I mean, they didn't just put makeup on, they braided their hair and they wore beautiful dresses. And so the cosmetic isn't the person, the identity, the real source. It's just your makeup. And so the universe has a source. And I find the best word to use for the absolute source is the will. And if you had to have a word to describe the divine, it would be the will. The will is absolutely supreme. Now, this is why the Son of the Father is Logos. Because Logos is logic or sayings, words, or the expression of the will. And so it is the will that initiates all the creation. But it is the expression of that will that is the Son. But of course there has to be a mother. And the mother is the beauty. Now remember, the mother and the father are one. So the will and the beauty of or the order is the woman. She keeps the house in order. And so the universe itself is the woman. And before there was the sun, there was just the one, where, since the expression or the sun or the mind, the human consciousness, hadn't yet been born, so you couldn't yet distinguish between the male and the female. And they were one. And so sometimes the first source is understood to be a woman because she produces the creation, is all that you can see. You don't realize that within the creation is the will, and together they're one. There is neither really male or female. But, so in Greek mythology or in the Platonism, they talk about Barbellus, and in other nations and their legends and myths, the Greek mythology and so forth, sometimes it's a woman, sometimes it's a man. But it's really the one. And then when they give birth, you know, Gaia and Uranus give birth to many other things, and many other children. And all the children are called the pleroma. And we're getting into a little bit of an area that I didn't intend to talk about, but the reason I'm saying that is because the universe itself is the child of our own will and the order of our mind that makes the universe as it is. It comes, all the happenings, all the things that you see, all the material things are there because they are part of the will. We will it to be, and we cannot but will it. No one wills chaos. There is no evil in the actual universe. But where did evil come from? And this is probably where my vision came in. It's a very difficult process to understand the divine comedy, which is what the Greeks called it. The divine comedy. Now, I know we think that means ha-ha. You know, we watch comedy and we think it's just a big laugh. But the word originally came from reality, is the divine comedy. I think we would do well to understand Greek mythology as well as we understand the Bible, because it's all mythology. David didn't actually rape Bathsheba. And Zeus didn't rape Rhea. But in the great divine comedy, they did. And this is the beginning. You know, rape came before love. Before we even understood love. So the Bible talks about these Nephilim that fell. Greeks talk about the Titans and the Cyclops and the 100-handed ones and all of this. And they're like, what is all this about? Well, this story is our history. It really is. It isn't just stories. If I were to try to tell you the history of the world for 1 billion trillion years, how would I do that? I could only characterize it in ways that our mind could comprehend it. And that's what the mythologies, let's call them that if you want. Although today it's come down to mean myth as though it's not true. But it is true. It's all true. The Apostle Paul calls it fables. He says the Judean fables, and we don't follow them, meaning the letter of them. We certainly do follow them. Paul talked about them and explained the mysteries to us. You might call them mysteries. But the mysteries are plays, divine comedies. That doesn't mean that King David didn't exist. He did. And so did Adam. But in telling the story, we're telling the real story, not just some happenstance. Oh, Adam walked along and found a rock and picked it up and threw it in the water, and who cares? I bet he found a lot of rocks and planted a lot of trees and disciplined his children and moved his whole camp several times and encountered monkeys and birds and animals and named them all and did a lot of things that we just barely have an idea. We don't need to know. But what we do need to know is why he's here. Who is he? Who are we? And we need to understand the Divine Comedy. So, I'm going to start by just telling you the vision as I had it. I mean, there are dreams and then there are visions. And the difference is, as I've said, a dream is something you have when you're sleeping. And it's easier to have a dream because everybody sleeps. And when you're asleep, your conscious mind is unaware of the conscious material world. And therefore, you're able to focus on thoughts and that stream from the divine inspiration. That's where it comes from, the will. And that's just as real as anything else, because in the physical world, it is the result or the consequence of our thoughts, our fears and our hopes and our dreams. And they create and manifest the world that we have. But in our dreams, we're getting the pre-manifestation. We're taking a look at our fears that manifest the monsters. And these fears are real, and they appear to be sort of monstrous exaggerations of things that will occur in life. They're related by symbolic ways. So if I dream of a monster, that monster will manifest in my life physically and literally. But it may not look like this one-eyed cyclops that I'm thinking of, that I'm seeing in the dream. But if I look at reality and I see the manifestation that's happened, I could characterize it as a monster. And the one eye I could characterize as symbolic of something about that. About its focus, about its blindness, or about its inability to have any power over me, because I have two eyes. And I don't mean the two eyes on the front of my face, I mean the eye of the physical world and the spiritual eye. The Cyclops only had one eye. They're dumb. You know, they originally had developed the eye of consciousness. And that's what it represented. But they were still ogres. In fact, the word ogre probably comes from Arga, which is one of the original Cyclops. And they did look like ogres. You've probably seen movies. There's a famous movie or a TV cartoon thing, whatever, today called the princess that meets this ogre and they fall in love. Well, that's a silly cartoon, because if they knew what the ogre meant, they would not be making such crazy cartoons. But one of the names of these ogres was Polyphemus, which is interesting. We all know what the word poly means, is many, right? Much. And Phemus, we get the word today, famous. So the Polyphemus was one of the main characters of the Cyclops. And Polyphemus means he was a very famous man. And he does represent a person. Well, I saw him in my vision. And in my vision, and so visions are when you're conscious, very conscious, and you're beholding an entire, kind of like a dream, but you're very conscious in your dream. Some people can initiate such visions through gazing into a mirror, or sometimes lying down and kind of going into a trance, a translucent state where they're not really asleep, but they're conscious, and yet they're not really focusing on anything material around the world or people talking, but they've they've gone into a trance and they're seeing a vision. Now, I don't use any of those methods. I've never used any of those methods. But what I've done is I've spent hours in prayer until the Lord began to show me and make known to me that still small voice, and his voice that would speak to me, this telepathic language. And this happened when I was very young. And so I have these kinds of visions now, even in a waking state, when I'm just driving down the road. I had one, an example yesterday. Something kind of strange happened, and it was an eventful, kind of eerie thing that was happening in the physical world. And I was like, oh, this isn't real. This is happening to me. But it shouldn't be. I'm in charge. And I was parked in the road and sitting in my truck. And as we're having this kind of revelation, it's almost as if it was like a Clint Eastwood movie. It was like, I don't know if that's a Clint Eastwood, whistle. Uh-oh, I awakened the dogs. That was just me, guys. Go back to sleep. But in this tumbleweed, which I haven't seen a tumbleweed around here in a long time, but this big tumbleweed starts just tumbling down the road toward me, and it's like a quiet. And I was realizing just how connected the material physical world is with our thoughts and our inner stream of consciousness that we're not always really aware of. If you can learn to become aware of that stream of consciousness coming from the will, then you can be truly enlightened, because along with that stream of consciousness, there's also always the voice of the angel that interprets for you. Anyway, I will tell you the vision that I had. I'm walking along in this very strange place. It was kind of a desert-looking canyon, maybe like the Grand Canyon or something. I don't know if it was quite like the Grand Canyon, but on the side to the left of this cliff, I noticed an opening or something. I found a cave. And I was very surprised and kind of excited by that. I thought, wow. Because when you find a cave, it's like something inside that, we know the cave goes down deep. We're looking for depth. And that's what we've been doing. We've been looking for deep truths and for answers. Sometimes you got to go down deep within to find these answers. And I found this cave, and I thought, well, this is interesting, and I'm curious, right? I want to know what's going on down there. What's the source of all of this up on top? So I'm going in the cave, and I probably didn't get very far. It just kept going. It was like a tunnel. And I thought, wow, where does this go? And it was just all exciting. But it's a little spooky. I was a little bit frightened because, I'm out of my natural element. And I don't know, for some reason there was some kind of a light I was able to see. I didn't think about that, but I was able to see. I didn't notice any lights, but I didn't go very far, and I met this man. This man was an ordinary-looking man. I don't know, kind of curly hair and kind of a Roman nose type guy. Maybe a little bit like Ted Bundy kind of a guy. That's the only person I can think of he looked like. And I didn't think of Ted Bundy at all when I was walking towards him. I didn't think about that at all. I was a little startled, and I didn't know what to do. But the man didn't frighten me too much. He looked a little bit sheepish, but I also felt like he knew what was down there in that cave. He kind of knew what was going on down here, and I wanted some answers. And I guess I just kind of like, maybe I shouldn't be there. Maybe he was going to be mad at me, or I don't know. But I'm like, oh, you know, hey, what's down here, basically. And the guy, I should have noticed it, but I didn't really, because I was a little nervous. But he looked a little nervous. He looked a little sheepish. But he was like, yeah, I know what's going on down here. I'll take you down here. Come on. This is really neat. And he starts taking me down this pathway. And I'm following him like, okay, this is going to be neat. I don't know where we're going or who this guy is or what's going to be at the end of this tunnel. But I know that it's important that I understand what it is down here. This has some monumentous importance. I've stumbled upon something that others haven't found. There's a hidden cave, and it's leading to something important. And I felt like this man might be able to enlighten me on something. And I knew that was true. I knew I was going to be enlightened. But at the same time, I didn't get a great feeling from this guy. I was a little nervous. And when you're going down in a cave all by yourself with some strange guy, you just kind of keep an eye out, right? Well, as we started going along, he started going faster, and I really, you know, didn't realize it. He got up ahead of me, and I looked around, and he was gone. And then I was lost, and I didn't know where I was. And I was still fighting with myself, like, well, why did you trust this man? And, you know, but I kept thinking, yeah, but I've got to know what's down here. So I started poking around, and I kept going. And I thought, well, he's probably just, he's here. He'll hear me. I say, hey, hello, you know, and I thought he'll come back. And he never did. And I searched around down there in this cave for a long time, and it was all these switchbacks and different tunnels and places. And I was like, where is this, you know, it started getting interesting because it was like, it opened up into like big rooms. And there was even like a forest down there. And it was just amazing. And all of a sudden, there was a little cave off ramp, or there's like a little side cave. And there was a door. And I thought, I wonder what's behind this door. And I opened the door. And there he was. And he was standing in this like room, like it was a little small room, like a serving room. And he was dishing out food into these bowls and handing them like a lunch to these creatures that were, I would call them, they look like ogres. One-eyed cyclops. And they were very, very dumb looking, like ignorant, very carnally minded and brute beasts, not very smart. Although they had the appearance of human, but just big ogres. And I was told in my mind and in my spirit, these are the Cyclops. And in that flash of a moment, when my eyes met his and he saw me, because he didn't expect me to make it down there, to find out where he was. He had thought that I would get lost down there. And I began to realize, as soon as these ogres saw me, they tried to follow me and they tried to get me. And I had to take off running. And I knew they were after me. And in my mind, I was thinking, man, they're going to eat me or something. It was really weird. I just knew that they were not after me to say hello. They were trying to get me. And I knew they were going to eat me. And then it hit me. I guess that the Lord showed me that this man was a traitor. And he fed the beasts. He knew about them. He was a human like me. And he had found these animalistic, carnal creatures that needed little children. And they were pedophiles. And they would they would take the humans and they would feed on them. Their energy, sexual energy, and then they would eventually eat them. And this man had been down there for a long time. He would go up to the surface and he would talk to the humans and he would never tell. He was lying. And when humans would come along down this path, he would then lure them into the cave. And they would become fodder for these demonic creatures down there in this hell. And I just happened to run fast enough that I got away. While I was running down this tunnel cave, it opened up to this big room where it was like an underground, I don't know, underground civilization. There were trees down there. There was waters. There was all kinds of dark kind of places for people, pathways. I don't know where it all led to. I do know that where he was, this man, and he was feeding them, it was a big auditorium. So I know there was an underground city down there. I didn't get to see the entire thing, and I didn't want to. Because if you lingered around down there, they'd get you. But what I did find out is that they had a system whereby this man, who in the vision the Lord told me represented a certain family that we talk about a lot on this video. We'll call him Judas Iscariot. He's betrayed us all. And he sold us all into slavery to these evil Cyclops. In the Greek mythology, they're called Cyclops. And they are individuals that developed that, remember, before the flood, there were these Nephilim that fell and had relations to daughters of men. They weren't from some other planet or anything like that. They were humans. They were beings on the earth that developed in the evolutionary process, as we all did. And it was kind of like the men of old, the men of renown. Another race, right, that eventually evolved into the race that we have, the Aryan race that we have now. These were the people that lived in the days of Atlantis. And that period of time, there were certain development of human beings that were wise in one sense or another. Very wise like humans, but not quite like humans. And they were developing into a stage, kind of like an animal pre-human stage, where they didn't yet have their third eye or their higher consciousness opened up. They were still carnal. This is why the world was, that age was brought to an end to create the next age. And the Lord showed me that when Atlantis fell, or when the flood came, just like the age we live in now, it's the harvest, and it's the final test, and certain ones will pass and go to a higher classroom. And so the age of Atlantis was a lower classroom. We're in a higher classroom now. We're about to go into another higher classroom. And there are certain ones that attain, and they're the firstborn. Everybody will eventually make it to the next realm, to the next class. But we get grades, and there's those who get A's and A pluses and A minuses, and some people get D's, and a few people get F's and flunk it and have to go back. We have this same story in the Bible where Jesus talks about the sheep and the goats. But a lot of people don't realize that there isn't just sheep and goats. There's also shepherds. So a lot of humans are like sheep. And the majority of humans, all of the actual humans, the billions of people on this earth, are just sheep. And the Lord is the shepherd, and he has some other shepherds with him, the good shepherds. And there will be 144,000 who were the firstborn, who were awakened already and will become the shepherds in the next world, along with Jesus. The rest of mankind, the great multitude, are like sheep, and they're going to get their immortality and move into the next classroom. But there is a small group, another about 144,000, that were not quite as valiant. These are certain ones that are maybe young souls that don't have enough prowess of the mind to realize that they're being led along by the fleshly nature, and they're not making good progress and making the right choices. And they're being deceived, and they're being enslaved by the dark forces. They were enslaved by certain of the last stage that didn't yet get to go on to the next classroom. There was a group of individuals that in the days of Atlantis were these Titans. Zeus came along and threw the Titans into Tartarus. That is an underground pit. It is a place beneath the earth. There is civilizations under the earth. They went underground and survived the flood. They were smart enough to do that. They certainly did have technologies, and they had a certain amount of knowledge. They had this one eye. In other words, they had this developed eye in this world and technology, and they were able to defeat death by going underground. And now they live off of the flesh of children, and they're pedophiles, and they live under the ground, and they need a supply of children, and they control us, and they feed off of us. And we live up here on the top of the world, and we're not aware that when our children come missing, they take them down there. And there's a certain, the way they are able to pull this off is they couldn't come up here and just ask for the children, because we'd be horrified if we saw them. So they have to send, they're demonic creatures and monsters. But the way they pulled this off is that they were able to take the lowest level of human being, the youngest of the class that we're living in, that are able to be deceived real well. And they developed this mesmerism and mind control by offering this group of individuals. Remember, Judas was in charge of the money bag, and he thought money was very important, and he didn't really have the same thinking as Jesus and the rest of the disciples. And Jesus knew that. And Jesus knew that that person was about to betray him. It's not that Jesus was unaware that there are dark forces in the world, but Jesus also knew that his children, his brothers and sisters, the sheep, all the world, was going to be somewhat deceived by these individuals and would be fodder and be made slaves. But yet they weren't like them, but they were being deceived by them. And this lowest group of, or bunch of this realm, of our age, would be used. Remember, Satan entered into Judas. So it wasn't Judas himself that did it. It was Satan inside of him. He was possessed. And remember, we see this all throughout the New Testament. There are certain individuals that become possessed. And many of us are possessed of demonic influence. But most of us do as Jesus say. You know, like Christians think, well, you got to cast out demons and stuff. Well, we do, but it's an ongoing thing. We're doing it every day, every one of us. The stuff that you see in the New Testament is kind of parabolic. We don't have to walk up to somebody and put our hand on him and go, in the name of Jesus. That's not actually how it works. We have to, through each and every day, be aware of the voices and be aware of the inclinations. And each and every one of us has the responsibility to say, no, get thee behind me. And most of the world, though we're, certainly most people certainly are influenced and sometimes controlled deeply by these demonic beings. Our soul is good and we don't want this. We're still deceived. And we're just sheep. And Jesus is going to lead them to fountains of living waters. But this other group is more responsible because they have made a decision out of fear or out of lust or out of whatever, childish impulse in their evolutionary stage that they are in, ended up being the patsy or the ventriloquist mouth or the puppets for the demonic beastly-like beings that had only developed so far. They had only developed the one eye, or this conscious mind. They hadn't yet developed the third eye, we call it today, or the spiritual eye. They weren't spiritual beings. So these individuals that look like humans, but are symbolically represented with one eye, means that they are not yet developed. They're from that age of Atlantis. They're the ones that, because of their wickedness, and don't confuse them with the Titans that are the Nephilim or the ones who had the relations with the daughters of men. They were all wiped off the face of the earth in the flood. And many of them went down into Tartarus, and Jesus preached to the spirits in prison. They weren't all evil, wicked forever and ever. But there was a group of them called the Cyclops. And they had developed the one eye, and they had kind of developed this technology. And they somehow went down underneath the earth in a cave and survived. And this is why you find the stories in the Greek mythology where there was a man called Odysseus. Odysseus was, in Latin, he's called Ulysses. And Odysseus was a hero, a Greek hero. Now, you've heard of the New Testament, Genesis 6:4, saying these were the men of old, the heroes, the men of fame. So some of them were heroes and some of them were men of fame. So you can't get all of these all in one spot, one bunch. There wasn't just Titans. There were also men of fame and heroes. And so the Greek mythology is telling you the same story like the Bible tells you with Genesis 6:4 in their way of telling the story. But the Greeks talk about some of the first individuals that lived there in Macedonia. And there was remember we've talked about this, where Aeneas, who was a lineal descendant of Romulus and Julius Caesar, and they came from what they said was Hercules. Now, Hercules is a individual in Greek mythology, is half deity and half man. What he did was Hercules is actually the story in our Bible that we have about Samson. Samson was this strong man. And Samson went up and had a relationship with Delilah. Delilah was a priesthood up there in the north. And he welded those two priesthoods together. Now, I don't want to go too far into that. But that Hercules line became the lineal descendants of Judah and Dan, who had a marriage with the princess or the high priestess Delilah up there in the line of the Poseidon. This is why we call him Poseidon, because Japheth is Epos and Dan, and they became Epos Dan, or Poseidon, Epo-Dan. So Poseidon is Epos Dan. And Epos Dan is Dan joined with Japheth. And Poseidon, remember, got the sea. That's the lower realm under the water. Now, that means that there is a civilization in the sky where the angels are, a more heavenly area where Zeus became king and he sends forth his angels. And then there was the realm of earth, and we all live here on the earth. And then there's a place beneath. It's called the sea. Now, people have wondered whether this place beneath the sea is really just the spirit realm, or whether it's actually beneath the ground, and there's tunnels and cities beneath the ground. We've shown, on this channel, I've shown you literally cities underneath the water. You can look on Google Earth and see them, and I've shown you them. It's undeniable. They have tunnels going to every port in the world, and they control us up here. We're being controlled by them. And that was Poseidon, or Japheth, who became the one who got the Isles of the Sea. One of the Isles of the Sea was Sicily. And Sicily is there by Italy. And Sicily is where Mount Etna is. And the story goes that there at Mount Etna, this great volcano, which, by the way, Mount Etna was originally called Vulcan, which is where we get the word Tubal-Cain in the Bible. Tubal, or Jabal. And it means fire, and it means a smith. So Tubal-Cain was a smith. He forged instruments of war and violence. And he lived on this little island, Japheth, or Poseidon. This is the lineage. There was a real people, and it called them these certain shepherds. They were violent men. And then there was this line from Troy, which was back to Judah. And they went up around Macedonia, and this guy named Odysseus, who was a child of Hercules, who was of the good and blessed children of the Lord that would inherit the earth. And this was in the developmental area. This is before time, way back just after the flood. Things were still settling down. And some of these individuals, these demonic one-eyed creatures, had survived the flood by going underground. And this is why they lived there on Sicily, because there was this mountain. There was a volcanic mountain. And they would forge weapons under the ground. Now, that may be a symbol of something even more nefarious. They were certainly warriors. They built cities. And they were forced underground because Odysseus was blessed by our divine Heavenly Father. Remember, Noah blessed his sons, and there was Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so these individuals wanted to take over the world and feed off the humans. They were very lustful. There was one group that they married this nymph from the sea. They were almost like little horses. This is why we call them little seahorses. Horses have been known from ancient mythological days as representing lust. So we have Sagittarius down there by Scorpio in the bottom of the wheel of astrology that represents the lust, right near the serpents and the scorpions of hell. And so they are Sagittarius, or these creatures that were kind of half horse and half men. In other words, they were human, but they were very lower carnal beings of lust. And they lived under the sea. And so the nymph married this individual called Polyphemus, which is where we get the word famous. They became famous, or heroes, or powerful men of the ancient days of before the flood. And they survived. And when Odysseus went up there with his group and tribe, they went to Macedonia and they built the city, and they were trying to live in accord with the Lord and his favor, and they were blessed by the Father. And the Father said, I bless you, now go and make this world, be fruitful and become many, and fill the earth. Well, Odysseus encounters one of these individuals that came up out of this volcanic mountain in Sicily at Mount Etna. Children of Tubal-Cain, children of Cain that got through the flood. And he's going along and he sees this cave, and he enters into the cave and he sees there's some food and stuff in there, and he has some men with him, and they're all hungry, and so they start eating. And all of a sudden, one of these giant cyclops comes home after shepherding his sheep, which has some symbolic undertones that this individual had some sheep to shepherd, some humans that he had. And it says he kept them all as slaves, and he kept them deep in the cave, and he would eat them, and he would use them as slaves, and he would use them as love nymphs. They were pedophiles, and they would have sex with the little boys. And in the story, when this Polyphemus comes home, this giant, and sees Odysseus and his men in the cave, he rolls a stone and locks them in and wants to keep them as slaves, and he eats 2 of them the first night, and the next night he eats another couple of them. So Odysseus says, what are we going to do? We're trapped in this, we're being enslaved by these demonic, carnal-natured beings that have no clue about the higher nature of love. They have no third eye. They're only carnal animals. So he had a little wine that he had been given, I don't know, a couple of days before that, before he'd gone in there, and he had it with him, and he says to the giant, when he comes in, he says, have some wine. Because he's like, he was the leader of the bunch, and he was like talking to him. And he's like, why don't you have some of our wine, and let's be friends, you know. I'll help you out, right? And the guy's, oh, wine, what's that? And he takes a swig, and he gets drunk. He gets the giant drunk. Well, while the guy's drinking his wine, Odysseus takes this wooden pole or stick that's laying around there, and he puts the end of it in the fire and hardens the tip like a point. And when the giant Polyphemus gets really drunk, he runs that stick through his eye so that he blinds him. Now he's completely blind. And this is also symbolic of the fact that these beings are completely blind to spiritual things. The reason that we're in this hell that we're in right now is because we're being controlled and ruled over by these demonic monsters that have no spiritual eye. They're only animals. And they only want to use us as slaves and our children as their little nymph pedophilial partners. And they bring them down under the ground and they use them down there. And Odysseus found them way back then. And so he stabbed him right through the eye, and then in the morning they escape, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but they escape. He gets on the ship, and he's sailing away, and Polyphemus prays to Satan, his deity, and Satan gives him this strength, and he does something or other, I guess with this sound of a trumpet or something, and these boulders, and this earthquake happens, and the volcanic blows, and, you know, big boulders, and lava comes flying down and just barely misses the ship, and they just barely got out of there. And they go off and, you know, found Troy and the lineage of Rome and Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great and so forth. And this is civilization as we know it. And it's a constant battle because underground there is a force, a power of individuals that are not like humans. They haven't developed their third eye. They're still very carnal in nature, and they live underground, and they're imprisoned down there, and they can't come out because they're too ugly, and we would find out who they are. If they ever came up, we would recognize their evil, and we would immediately get rid of them, because there isn't that many of them, and we could defeat them. So they stay underground, and in order to continue to survive all these centuries, they have commandeered a certain group of humans, the lowest of the low, that we call this elite family that have infiltrated the true royal bloodline of King David and Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, and they've infiltrated, and they're humans like us, and they walk around and look like humans, but they have a covenant with these underground beings, and they take these little babies and children, our children, and they take them down to the entrance of these caves and feed them to these ogres that live under the ground. And they've been down there for a long, long time. Their power is about to be over because Jesus is coming, and this particular age that we live in, we're going to go through a judgment, and this time it will be burned with fire, and they'll be completely gone. And this earth will be transformed into a paradise. But it was quite a revelation. The Lord was showing me all of this in vision and explaining it to me. The Lord was sharing with me that we all came out from the center of the galaxy. And it's all explained there in the Greek mythology and in the Bible. The Judean fables have all the same information. But one of the lovers of these polyphemus orgs was called Galatia. Galatia is where we get our word galaxy. And galaxy is where we get the word Milky Way, because you've heard the word lactate in English, lactate, which means milk. So galactate means the Milky Way. And Galactia is the Milky Way. And along the Milky Way, it's called the Milky Way because it's a way. We all came out from the center. And there's these rivers. There's 4 rivers that come out from Eden. And along this Milky Way, which is our arm of Orion, the Orion arm. And because if you look towards Orion, you're looking down towards the center of the galaxy. And it's called the South. Orion in the regions of the South, it says in the book of Job. And that's where we came from. That's our ancestry. We're going north to the pole star, where Jesus' throne is raised and everything revolves around the north, which is the future, which is our purpose. But we came from the ancient chaotic past, from the swirling vortex of the vagina, which is what this egg or this galaxy was represented as we said, as we saw in the other video we did a couple days ago from the Mandean literature. But as we came out from the south, the first place we come along and we get to what we call the Pleiades. In the book of Job, it mentions the Pleiades, it mentions the Bear and Orion and different stars. And it says, the Lord is talking to Job and says, can you bind the influence of the Pleiades? Well, why is there an influence from the Pleiades? And why would we want to bind it? Well, because that's where we came. That's our mother. So there are 7 stars in the Pleiades. That's the 7 women in the train of our mother. Remember, our divine mother is the creation itself. And we're being born from her. And we're the higher conscious mind that's being born. The Christ mind. And so that's our deep ancient past. And when we reached that point, we were born. And then coming out from there, we come down to what the Germanic peoples referenced as Aldebaran. And they would have mystics and prophets, and they would, or called mediums or whatever, that they would put in these special places and give them all the luxuries and comforts and develop their minds to become mediums, the German people. And in this cult we called the Vril Society. So this guy we call Hister, N-A-Z-I's, they opened up the bottomless pit. That's the bottomless pit, the vagina, the depths of the swirling vortex from which we came from, which is the south, which is towards the center of the galaxy where we came from. And they recorded that they communicated with these beings from Aldebaran. Well, of course, what they were doing is they were communicating with devils who had not yet developed. We should be communicating with higher consciousness from Jesus and Polaris and beyond. But they were communicating with devils into the realm of the fires, or because it's not even really the light, it's just a fire. It's a burning volcano. And so, and if you notice, if you look up in the sky, this time of year, you have to wait till like 2 or 3 in the morning, but Orion's coming up. In the spring, it comes right up, and you can see it just as it gets dark, coming up in the horizon as it gets dark. But Orion there are these 3 stars that are Orion's belt. So you can see it very well. But if you look at Orion's belt and you forget about it's supposed to be some guy named Orion with a bow trying to shoot the bull's eye in Taurus, where Pleiades is our mother riding the beast. But if you just look at the stars, it looks like a door. It's like a square. Sometimes it looks like an arrow, and there is an arrow there because Orion's got an arrow and he's going to shoot the bullseye. But it also, if you look at it carefully enough, actually I think the first impression is it's like a big door, a big square. It's kind of a portal. It's where we all are born from. It's like Orion's nebula is where we all came from. And perhaps that is where we came from at some point. Before that, we were in the center of the galaxy, but that huge nebula there is an exploding area of consciousness where the lower consciousness exploded and became a higher consciousness of this physical, animalistic life that we have. Now we're about to go into another age where we're going to have access to the higher consciousness. But if you're looking back in that direction and you're communicating with spirits from that area, even Jehovah's Witnesses used to say that their deity lived on Alcyon, which is towards the past. And they were not listening to our Heavenly Father, but they were listening to Yahweh. So we asked the question earlier, are these individuals that live beneath the earth in Tartarus, is it a spiritual realm or are they literally living beneath the earth? Well, it's both. Because in reality, these demonic, monstrous forces were really once us. We already went through all of that. We already went through the animal kingdom. We already evolved through the mineral and the plant and the animal, and then we became human. And now we're going to become deities. So we're just looking into the past. All those stars out there, they're not actually there in our own moment of time. They're something that existed in the past. We're seeing the light now because light travels at 186,000 miles per second. And it's so far away because they're so vast and huge that we're really looking into the past. And so when you are looking into the past and you're communicating with spirit, you're communicating with your memories, and you're communicating with, remember, there is no time and space. And these beings exist still, but in our subconscious. It's all kind of interrelated. Your subconscious is your past. The only mind you have right now is your present conscious mind. The future is not already occurred. It's something that we are going to make from our will. The past is something that we've already experienced, things that we've gone through. It wasn't evil. It was simply, animals aren't evil, but they don't have that third eye. But there is a group of individuals that never did move on in the classroom and develop any higher consciousness at this time. They are simply undeveloped spiritually and abnormally, monstrously developed in the more animalistic consciousness. And these are the elite individuals that are ruling over us. They don't yet have their spiritual eye. Now, whether or not one day they will eventually attain, that's something we don't even want to get into here in this video. But there isn't even that many of them. But they have become very developed in their lower eye, or in this consciousness. And they have technology and ships, and they control. And they eat our children, and I'm not kidding you, and it's literal. But they are communicating from the past, from their carnal, instinctual nature. And this is what they've developed. And so, yeah, they're listening to voices that could be understood as coming from Aldebaran, but it's really deep within themselves. It's what the Bible says will not be brought to mind anymore. That's the abyss. And that's why the devil's thrown into the abyss, and there's a key, and it will be locked. So once the key has been turned, and all of these monsters, the devil and the beast have been thrown into the abyss, and the key is turned and it's locked. There will be no more access to that Aldebaran and those demonic forces. They don't exist anyway. They're memories. They're past inclinations and instinctual behavior. And these individuals that were completely mesmerized and being ruled over by them and controlled will now finally be free. And they may be perhaps able to move on from that point. But yes, there are a group of individuals that live underground. They are, for all practical purposes, humans. But they are undeveloped spiritually. And they are living off of our children. And they're all pedophiles. And this is why they take our children. And they have these tunnels that they've made that go underground. These cities that have been there for ancient times. Now, one of the things that Greek mythology says about these Cyclops is that they were the wall builders. The Greeks said these individuals that they met, that lived underground, that wanted their children, that they had an eternal war with, these evil individuals were the ones that had built the Mycenaean age and these stone buildings. They were the Masons. And so today, they still call themselves Masons. That is not a term that ever applied to the good guys. Masons is a modern thing. There were good people that were involved with Freemasonry at the beginning of the last century, but they were not really aware that word Mason had to do with people that go back to those who built the cities and these towers that were going back to Tubal-Cain, the ironsmith from Mount Etna. And so today Masonry is mixed with a lot of wisdom. I mean, you know, certainly there is history, there is knowledge that one could learn from them. And they have true history in their teachings. But most of it is really just a hatred for Jesus and a deception and a sort of a secret society where they use certain individuals, the elite that are running the world today, the Vlad the Impaler and the Dracula and all of these that are sucking our blood, and taking our children down to them to appease the deities. It's what they did when they sacrificed their children to Moloch. That's what we're doing. That's what these elite individuals are doing. They're sacrificing our children to these fiends. And for their service, they get to be living in luxury in their castles on the tops of the hills because they get this technology that's given to them by the one-eyed Cyclops. So I'm going to probably just leave it there. We're well over an hour now. I know some of you might think this is a strange video that we've done today, but I tell you sincerely that this is true, and we need to know about these individuals and what they're up to and why they're here. They are trying to keep us in control and use us as slaves. That's what this whole story is about, and we're about to become free. Jesus is coming soon. I'm going to go ahead and go. Hope you have a wonderful evening. May the Lord bless you guys, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.